Welcome everyone to Research Data Management at RMIT, presented as part of the Library Seminars for Researchers, the Spotlight Series. We have regular presentations happening all throughout the year, and you can follow us on the Eventbrite link to get details of when those new events come up. I'll just begin as well with a couple of little housekeeping things. Obviously, people are well versed. If you need to ask questions in the chat, please do so, and we'll also try and answer questions towards the end. But there's a lot of information in this session, and it's primarily posed as an overview, and the intention being if there's individual things that you want to go deeper on, to contact the library, and we can provide individual assistance or go into more detail on those things. So as is customary, we'd also like to start the presentation with an acknowledgement of country. Let me just go to my slides here. Oh, that's not live. What's going on there? Apologies. Okay. Yeah, acknowledgement of country. So yes, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from stolen lands. I'm talking to you from the lands of the Wiradjuri of the mighty Kulin Nation. I'd also like to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and a treaty is still to be signed. We at RMIT Library stand in solidarity with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We'd like to pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Now today, my name's Sam Gibbard. I'm a coordinator of research services at RMIT Library. Also presenting is Adam Rivette, who's our research data and repository librarian, along with we're really pleased to welcome Dr. Andrew Martin and Professor Dinesh Kumar, who are academics here and also proponents of research data, and will talk to you about their own individual experiences at the towards the latter end of the presentation.
Okay, I guess it's my time to start talking. Great. Okay, well, thanks everyone for coming. As anyone who's ever seen me talk about this subject or given a presentation on it, I always start with this beautiful circle, otherwise known as the Research Data Management Lifecycle, because it kind of encapsulates everything that at times when you discuss this subject can seem like an atomized concern. So if we're talking about a collection principle, we might be talking about the ethics of research data management. If we're talking about the promotion of research data management, we might be talking about something like Figshare. If we're talking about something like the principles of data searching and data reuse, we might be talking about the Australian Research Data Commons and the kind of citations you can gather or garner by collecting and describing your research data. So it's always useful, I think, to think about what we're talking about today and all the points we're going to be touching upon as existing within this larger life cycle. So I guess that's just up front. Sam, can we get the next slide? Great. Now, the four data principles, or the FAIR data principles, FOR and FAIR, developed at a Lorentz Center workshop in 2015, and maybe the most useful way to conceptualize the principles behind research data management collection and without simply reading the descriptions that I've added on this slide deck, it's a way of thinking about the work that researchers collect and how they describe it, and whether other people can use it. Will it ever be able to be found by someone else? And when they do find it, if they ever do get, oh yes, by the way, these slides will be shared. I should have added that at the start. Apologies, Ginny. Sorry, to go back to what I was saying. If someone wants to use the data that another researcher has collected, what kind of software will they need? What kind of computer will they need? Is the metadata standard? Is it being controlled using a controlled vocabulary? Does it have a DOI? Things like this. The concerns which can be part of a research data management plan, but are not always part of a data management plan. So the data principles, the FAIR data principles, are a way of conceptualizing the work of research data management collection. Next slide, Sam.
A little bit of a delay between these.
Oh, sorry.
There we go.
Now, this is a potentially enormous subject, which unfortunately I can only briefly touch upon, research integrity. I'm realizing now that I should have added a link to the online training that we offer at RMIT, which I've just put in the comments now for anyone who's interested. The Research Integrity Training and Education online course, which details extensively ethics considerations. But to kind of preempt what Sam will say on the next slide about the Research Data Management Plan, before we can talk about promotion and citations and all the other exciting stuff, we have to think about the particular ethical concerns that are raised by your individual research project. And so it's integral, and no pun intended, it's integral to consider those ethical considerations and what you do with that data, how it's stored, and the people that the data relates to at the very beginning of your research project. So while I can't go into too much detail here, I've provided some links there about what RMIT offers regarding research integrity, and a contact address for anyone who has questions about research integrity. And I guess that sort of leads into making a data management plan, which I guess Sam will take off with on the next slide.
Okay, thanks, Adam. So, I mean, obviously, you may be at different intersections on that research data lifecycle, but the intention is that if you're just starting out on that journey, you would probably want to start with a data management plan. This really is about setting yourself up for success by working through what the main issues are going to be in terms of how you're storing your data, how you're backing it up, any of these issues on the slide, like data reuse, access, confidentiality, how long do you need to retain your data for, and any disposal or destruction conditions. So there's more details on how to create a data management plan, and the guidelines linked here. And as we said, we'll share these slides because we realize we're sort of rapid fire going through these topics, and there's a lot more information on all of these. So when it comes to storing your data, again, I think people are at various intersections on this journey, but I think you may or may not understand all of the options available to you. So we've just tried to list them here. There's also a link at the bottom of this slide that takes you to the page with further information. But you want to make sure your data is backed up in multiple places, as well as having it on a network drive that is also backed up. If you're dealing with large data sets, you may require accessing larger scale data stores, and that can be done through ITS. So one that surprisingly we do find that a lot of researchers aren't familiar with is Cloudstor, and Cloudstor is provided to you via using your RMIT login, and that's supported by the Australian government through AARNet. It's essentially an academic version of Dropbox, where you get up to 100 gigabytes of free space, and what it really is an excellent collaboration tool. So if you need to share files or work on files with multiple users, or make things available to other people, not just within RMIT but other academic institutions, Dropbox is the perfect tool for that. So that's very much of that collaboration and working stage. It's we'll talk about Figshare as terms of the promotion and publishing, but yeah, if you want to know more about Cloudstor in particular and walk through how to use that, that's something you can contact the Library Research Services, and we can do a one-on-one consultation with you. So I'll hand back to Adam for Figshare. Adam, and you might be on mute. Sorry.
For once in my life, I put myself on mute. I knew I shouldn't have done that. Apologies, everyone. I was just going to say up front, Sam and I offer one-on-one or group presentations or demonstrations on Figshare. It's our new kind of tool to play with. So I can only really offer you a précis of its descriptive powers, but essentially for a long time RMIT hasn't offered a public facing data repository. So I don't know if anyone has in individual experience, you can create a personal account with Figshare, but we finally have an institutional copy of Figshare, and it offers a free and easy place to store and promote data. It supports hundreds of different file types. Most crucially, it mints DOIs, or digital object identifiers. So all the data sets you upload there can have permalinks that you can use to share with colleagues and other people. Obviously, it boosts citations at creating data sets and uploading them. It has built-in alt metrics and other citation possibilities, so it allows you to gauge research impact. And it also has things like it offers version control. We have an enormous backend of storage space, so there's no problem there. Often the limitations of a personal account with Figshare means you tap out at a certain level for storage, but the institutional Figshare has no such restrictions. And it allows you to create your own metadata. So while there are some set fields regarding your school or college, there are a lot of other free text fields that allow you to describe create your own metadata, descriptors, subject headings, and allows you to double back on some of those fair data principles I mentioned at the start. It allows you to describe the software you use to generate the data, let's say, or the software that might be required to reuse the data. So it lays out a clear field for use with a link at the bottom there. Like I said, I usually give demos of Figshare. I can't really today, but please let us know if you want a further demonstration of some of its benefits. Sam, next slide.
Yep.
Great. Just a quick one here. When we talk about Figshare and we talk about the benefits of using it, we're talking about the benefits of sharing in that research data lifecycle. So there are some ways to conceptualize the benefits of using Figshare or a similar service. Transparency is one, validating your work. I mean, in a way, publications are just descriptions of research and the conclusions that you make while committing that research, but data can be proof of how the work is done. So in one sense of its validation, it can also protect you against claims and counterclaims against the veracity of the research. Obviously, there have been numerous cases recently where cancer research is one example in an Australian institution that the findings of that research were challenged, and the data proved that the work couldn't be replicated and had actually been falsified. So obviously that's a very serious aspersion to cast on a researcher, but sharing data and data maintenance is a way of protecting you from those sort of claims. Not suggesting anyone would falsify on purpose, but if challenges are made, the data can be there to back up findings. The benefits of collaboration should be fairly self-evident, but just like a citation might start a relationship between two researchers, opening up data for other researchers might be a way of funding or fueling cross-institutional or cross-discipline collaboration. Likewise, the obvious benefits of research acceleration. Obviously, in some fields like medical research, it can be quite a contested field, but in a more utopian vision of data sharing, the sharing of open data between researchers could fuel and speed up scientific and medical discoveries. And of course, open data and open data sharing tries to break down what is commonly called the reproducibility crisis. What we touched on with the fair data principles, again, the ability of research to take your data set and spin it again into new work and not have it, and ideally not have the research be something that can only be reproduced by the original researcher on their original tools. So it's a chance to avoid the reproducibility crisis. And speaking of discoverability, I'll let Sam go on this one.
Thank you, Adam. So yeah, there's a lot of resources when you go to share your data at the end, where it all aids in the concept of discoverability. So obviously, it's not just about sharing. You want people to know about it, and that also raises your own research profile. So when you make your data sets available through Figshare, it publishes out to Research Data Australia, Trove, which is the National Library Catalogue. Obviously, tools like Google will be able to index the research data easily by harvesting directly from Figshare. And it also creates links between our own research repositories. So if your data relates most likely to a published output, the published output would be housed in the research repository here at RMIT, and then you can create interlinkages between your data set as well, which Adam covered earlier, increases citations as well.
Okay, this is me again. So I shouldn't have written how to think about data. I guess this is just one way to think about data. But as I was putting these slides together, I came across this quote, which I wanted to use as a segue into Andrew and Dinesh discussing their work. Often when Sam and I talk to students and researchers about Figshare, we talk about a data deposit and creating a data set in something like Figshare as a final step. So you've done your work, a publication's been made, it's all done, and then the data is still there, and you bundle all together into a neat package, deposit it in something like Figshare, and you're off to your next piece of work. But this quote from Matthias Astel, the marketing manager of Springer Nature, where he says, the vast majority of publishers, including Nature, Science, Biomed Central, Elsevier, Public Library of Open Science, and Sage, so some pretty big hitters there, don't consider the publication of a data set as a prior publication. This means pre-publishing data won't jeopardize your ability to publish research articles later, which in turn means you can even publish your data while you are still carrying out your research. I think it's worth mentioning because I can get hung up on the life cycle sometimes, and often data publishing and promotion is considered as the final step, but conceptualized here the way that Matthias has, we can see research data as an ongoing concern which can be published or shared at any point. And often researchers are necessarily wary about sharing their research data at times, but this sort of quote and this sort of conceptualization of data research lets us see it as an ongoing concern that can be shared at any particular point that doesn't have to halt a researcher's career at any point. So rather than hiding someone's work, and there are obviously cases where that's relevant, but in this instance, the data is an ongoing publication rather than a single publication at the end of the project. So I guess on that note, Sam, maybe it might be useful to let the researcher's perspective color maybe some of the more abstract or dry stuff we've said. Andrew, is that the plan? We're going to go first?
Thanks, Sam. Okay, so yes, I'm Andrew. I'm from physics in the School of Science, and I guess I'm here because I used Figshare earlier this year, about when the institutional form of Figshare came online for RMIT. Sam gave me a lot of help with that, and I guess I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how data is used in the research community that I work in, and in particular, there's really a lot of data in this community. So it's just a bit of a case study, really. Okay, you want to go to the next slide, Sam?
There we go.
So I guess first I'll just give you a little bit of background about the scientific field that I come from. And essentially it's a field that uses very large X-ray facilities like the Australian synchrotron, which is down in Clayton in Melbourne, just over the road from Monash. Or I think the other ones that I use are some international facilities called X-ray free electron lasers. These facilities are really large. The Australian synchrotron is about the size of a football field. And the one that you've got down the bottom is a thing called the Linear Coherent Light Source, which is in Stanford in California. It's about 3 kilometers long. And without really going into the technical details, basically what these machines do is they have big accelerators and they speed up electrons to very, very high speeds, put them through some magnets and make very bright X-ray beams. So they're basically very large X-ray light bulbs. That's kind of what they are. Do you want to go to the next slide, Sam?
Yeah.
And what we use them for is this. I mean, there's heaps of uses really spanning, material science and biology and going up to medical imaging and all sorts of things. But a lot of, I guess, what I use them for is really to get down to the atomic details of materials and proteins and things like that. And some of the data that we actually measure at these facilities, particularly the type of experiments I'm involved in, it involves taking a camera, an X-ray camera, and taking a kind of picture of where the X-rays go after they have interacted with the material. And the example you've got there on the right is an X-ray pattern that we collected from a protein nanocrystal. As you can see, the actual pictures we actually collect on the X-ray detector don't really look like the thing we took the picture of. But that's kind of what we analyze them and we figure out either an image or we determine an atomic structure or something like that, and that's where a lot of the physics actually comes in. But I guess the point of showing you this was just to show you that the kind of data we're talking about are images, like they're actual images taken on a particular camera. Another aspect of these experiments is that access to these facilities is usually free. Most of these facilities are government built, and there's many different countries around the world. They all pretty much operate on the same principle, which is that the government builds them for, usually sometimes with some industry partnership, but they build them mostly for fundamental science. So usually the researchers might have to pay for, travel costs to get to the facility. They might have to pay for any materials they want to bring to the facility, but otherwise it's actually free access. The flip side, though, is it's competitive. So we have to put in proposals to do experiments, and they get ranked and they get peer reviewed, and then the best proposals get the access to the facility. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the X-ray free electron laser facilities are probably where we get the most data, and it's because they produce basically hundreds or thousands of these images per second. So if you kind of imagine running your camera at sort of 1,000 frames a second, that's kind of what we're doing. And your experiment might go over several days. So you might have kind of 50 hours worth of experiment, and you can very easily rack up tens or hundreds of terabytes of data in one of these experiments. Not all of it is useful, but all of it is collected and all of it is stored, and all of it has to be kind of analyzed by the researchers to figure out, which is actually the best data to determine, or to test the scientific hypotheses that they were setting out to collect. So this particular community that uses these particular international X-ray facilities has a kind of a data. I mean, data is actually very important, and data management, I guess, became very integral to how the actually community runs and how the scientific field runs. Because these facilities are actually free to access, but the amount of data you can generate is so large, it's not actually realistic to expect every user group that comes for just a few days to have the resources back at their home institution to actually take all the data back home, to store it, to manage it, and all that sort of thing. So actually it's built into these facilities that they would have basically servers on site, and they have data storage on site. And you usually access a lot of your data, at least the raw data, you would access remotely by effectively remotely logging into a server. Yeah, so that's kind of mostly how it works. And then, yeah, what you might do is that after, I guess, you've analyzed some of your data, you might find a subset of that data which is more useful, and then you might take that back home, and you might analyze it further and turn it into figures in a paper, and then eventually publish a small part of your data. Can I go to the next slide, please, Sam? Yeah, so I guess in this community, this is kind of how, I mean, it's not the data management lifecycle, but it's the sort of data lifecycle in the scientific kind of thing, is that you would start out trying to get access to a facility, and you would write a proposal. That might take a few months to get reviewed, and if it is hopefully accepted, you might have to wait another few months before you're actually scheduled at the facility. So, the better part of 6 to 10 months has sort of already passed before you actually get to start your experiment, and you might use some of that to actually prepare what you need to do the experiment and access your materials and buy your materials and things like that. Then your experiment might only go for sort of 2 to 5 days, but in that time you collect your kind of tens of terabytes of data. Then, because you've really got a lot of data, it's pretty standard for the actual data analysis to take up to a couple of years before you've really sure that you've got your kind of scientific result, at which point you can publish your paper and you publish your data very often in this field. And then you've actually got your material for your next proposal. And so, then you would go and put in another proposal, and you would do the whole thing all over again. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so the community actually set itself up with a database to store the data for itself. So for a particular class of experiment, for a particular type of imaging experiment, particularly for proteins, this was set up in Berkeley in California. I think it's the Berkeley National Lab over there is where it's housed. It's the current X-ray imaging database. And it was really pretty good that this thing was set up early on, because access to some of these facilities, particularly the international X-ray laser ones, is so limited. The only way that really the community could grow was by sharing data pretty much from the start. You're collecting these very large data sets, and for other groups who didn't have the fortune to be there at that first experiment or to get time on the experiment, sharing data has actually been really excellent way for us to grow the community. It's very easy, you know, if you've got a new PhD student or a new postdoc and they're trying to learn the techniques, learn how to analyze data, so that they can go and get some real source data and some raw data and work with it to learn. So CXIDB was pretty much fulfilled that purpose for this community. They standardized the data format using a HDF5 format. I guess for anybody who might not be familiar with that, it's actually a very flexible format where inside the file itself, you get you can basically organize your data and all your metadata a little bit like folders on your computer. So you set up data sets inside the file and you set up metadata kind of labels, and you can basically organize your data inside your file. And so this particular database, they set up a standard data format, which for everybody to use when they upload. Then they gave the data set a DOI and they link back to the papers where it was originally published and all that sort of stuff. And so this has actually been really valuable for us. Yeah, and I think, yeah, we'll go to the next slide. And I guess the other one is, I guess the last thing I'll just mention is that for smaller data, so I guess the CXIDB was really good when the data sets get up to kind of a terabyte. But I've also got, you know, other science where I work on just sort of data sets that are more like gigabytes. And for that, for a couple of publications this year, I was able to use Figshare, the RMIT Figshare account. And I would just say that I actually really enjoyed using this. I thought it was really easy. It was a really easy interface to upload the data. It was nice that one could set up the data set with the DOI before you publish it and delay publication, so that you could time the publication of your data to come out with your article. You know, I mean, obviously, I guess it was mentioned earlier on that journals are not so worried about that you can publish your data earlier, but it was still nice for me to be able to do that so that I could finalize the data set and the manuscript at the same time. Yeah, it was a really great thing to use. So I'm actually really glad that RMIT has done this and provided Figshare for us to use. Yeah, and I think that's all I've got. Thanks.
And if they want to,
pardon me, hold on.
That's okay.
There we go.
Right now, Andrew took the thunder away, and he's already given us all the details about the importance of the data. So, however, I will continue down that theme. Whenever we are discovering, we need the data and we need the analysis. And the labs, whatever be, whether they're the small labs like the kinds which we use in biomedical, or the large ones like the Andrew showed. Yeah, the labs basically collect the data and then we take it away and we do the analysis. Of course, different research will have different balance between the data and the analysis, the effort required to collect the data and the effort required to do the analysis. But at the end of the day, it is the quality of research depends upon the combination of both quality of data and quality of analysis. And if we can get this picture there, then we know that our work is going to be impactful. Next slide, please. So the data can exist in all kinds of things: health, geoscience, space, social, financial. Now, I work in the area of health, but I'm certain that in today's climate of the American politics, we are very familiar with what's happening in the social context. And again, more recently, we've been hearing about all the financial data exploitation that is available, etc. So these are some of the examples where you have a lot of data which is available and for the analysis to be conducted. Next slide, please. For health, I'll give you 4 examples, except the first one. The other 3 are from Australia. And so these are the 3 I've been involved in, so I thought I'll give you that as a starting point. Framingham. Now, any of us who are above the age of 45 and have been to our GPs would have been given a risk assessment of our cardiovascular disease. Is there anyone who's familiar with Framingham model? No? Okay. Framingham is a suburbia in Baltimore, I think. Baltimore? Boston. Okay, and in that, when after the Second World War, data was collected for lots and lots of people longitudinally, over, in other words, over time, and this data was put together to determine, see what happened to their health in the whether they died of cardiovascular diseases or anything else happened, and that together was taken into account to make what's called as a Framingham model. It is something which is a combination of socio-demographics and clinical data put together. And there was another one which was done in Australia, which is called the Blue Mountains data, started somewhere in the late 80s or early 90s. And for 15 years, the data was collected largely of the eyes of people who lived in the suburbia or the township of Blue Mountains near Sydney. Ryan is another one which is out of Western Australia, and PATH is one which is run by ANU. Now, these are all health data sets. Health data sets, while they do not need a large amount, a large laboratory, these data sets use the individual people, the human beings, people like us. And so we got to be careful in how this data is to be used. Next slide, please. In the geospatial, you've got applications such as the mining maps, Google Maps is a clear one example. You could use that same thing for real estate. You could use it for water management. So the point I'm trying to drive here is that in all of these cases, there is an issue of there can be compromises if the data is not saved or managed properly. Next slide, please. Financial, we can understand the cash flow of people or of countries or of societies. We can do things like interest prediction. We can talk about currency. So these are major issues, and people who have the access to the data can need to be extremely careful in how it is used. Next slide, please. Social, of course, we've seen what happens when the social data can go out of hand. And we also know now that if we are not careful, we are part of the market trends. We are, people understand what is going to be, what we are going to be doing, and we get targeted, etc. So this data is again things which can be worrisome if not managed. Next, please. Right. But in all of these things, we as researchers, what are we looking for? We're looking for publications, we're looking for grants, and we're looking for money, and we're looking for prestige. If we have good data, if we can put the data across, rather than hang on to the data and want to do everything ourselves, it can lead to joint publications, citations. I've got citations twice, my apologies. And it can lead to networking. Networking perhaps, and most important, perhaps we can actually make an impact, a social impact, and the research does not need to be repeated. So the issue is that if we want to have high research outcomes, we need to be able to have the data available and managed. But so there are business opportunities. So someone makes a shovel, another one does a digging, and then someone makes the actual iron. Same as with the data. So just because we've got the data does not mean that we shouldn't, or that we can do everything out of that. If we were to be able to spread it around, let people use it who do not have the data, then it's good dollars. Next slide, please. So here you come across, I want to now take an example, but when you're collecting the data, you have to be extremely careful as to how you collect it. Say, take an example of the data collected of the wounds, the images of the wounds. Now, this is a real example, which is a project done at RMIT. It is using hyperspectral imaging, and it's a lot of data there. Nothing compared to what Andrew is doing, but still, it ends up in terabytes. So, but if you just take the images, no one's gonna give you anything for it. No, it's not useful. You can't even publish it. But now add to this information, such as what happened to the wound, how did it heal, what was the clinical history of the patient, maybe the patient demographics, and then bingo, you got a winner. The point is that when you are deciding to collect data, you have to be sure, you have to have a plan. And the plan is something which is going to make the data valuable, or it's gonna become insignificant. So if the project says collect the images of the data, you go and collect that. Okay, well, you might have finished your project, but nothing else is going to come out of it. But now, if you have a plan that I'm collecting the data, I can collect these other pieces of information, and this is what I can do with it. Well, then the data becomes extremely valuable. Next slide, please. So it is essential to plan your data collection. What are you going to do with it? So you have one project. Is that it? Are you going to let other people use it? And if so, that doesn't, when you say that the other people are going to use it, it does not mean that they're going to use it for free. It does not mean that it's going to be without your knowledge. It could be still under your control. However, are you going to let other people use it with a plan? And then how are you going to manage it? Because the issue comes is like in the healthcare system, there are ethics. So have you declared in the ethics, what are you going to be doing with the data? Where are you going to store the data? How long are you going to store the data? All of these come under the issue of the management of the data. Next slide, please. And thus, it is important that right at the beginning, we have to declare the intent and the plan of what are we going to do with the data. So this might be required for the ethics. It also may be required for the people who are going, whose data we've collected or from whom we've got it. It also will depend upon the technology that we are using to collect the data. So it is not simply that, well, and we also have to be aware that my idea of using the data may be limited. But if I open it to the public, I might be able to get 100 more new ideas. And thus, the work gets a life of its own. So the data in itself becomes valuable when we allow and encourage other people to use it. However, but before we can do that, we should have made a plan on what are the potentials, and also we have to make a declaration as to what all are we going to be using it for. Next slide, please. We also have to know that the data has to be stored for a period. We should know where we're going to store it, for how long are we going to store it. Then there are issues about the national boundaries. Laws are there, which determine where, if you collect the data from within China, the data cannot be exported out of China without the permission, which does. You cannot store it on a place like Google Drive or any of these other cloud, because that may be stored anywhere else in the world. So if the data has to be collected from Chinese citizens, it has to be collected on a server located within China, at least from the health viewpoint. Similarly, there are certain laws in the US which are very, very US-centric. So we have to be aware of these things when we are using the data. So if we are collecting the data somewhere, we should know these things before and then plan accordingly. Next slide, please. Then I think this is one of my last slides, and the issue is who owns the data? Now, this is a very, very generic question, and I would like to encourage all, some of us to get into this. If you collect, one simple point is, if a grad student has collected the data in your lab, who wants it? Do you own it? Does the student own it? Or what happens? I'm hoping to get a response, guys. Hi, Claire, please.
Hello, does the institution that you're studying with own the data? Just assuming that you're studying a PhD, for example.
Right. And now that is true. So it is not that you as a supervisor own the data, but you manage the data. The student has collected the data and has a right to do the analysis on the data. But after that, the data does not go with the student. So if the student decides to leave the university, the data remains with the university. Okay, now this sometimes is confusing because the student might have used the data in the thesis and has collected the data and might believe that, hang on, this is mine. So it is important that that is clarified. Again, you have the right to use the data, but you also have only a limited right. But it's also essential to realize that even the university only owns the data to an extent. So if the data has been collected on people, I'm talking about from a biomedical viewpoint because that's the field I am in, then people would have signed the consent as to what the data can be used for. Thus, RMIT's ownership of the data is only limited to the declared usage of the data. Is that does that make sense? Clear?
So the declared usage would be to achieve a PhD through the university, for example?
No.
And once, no?
It would be the specific, okay, I collect the social data of people within the universe, within Melbourne, to understand whether people are eating fries or hash browns. But now, that is a question I am addressing in my when I started recording the data. But now I suddenly get an idea that I can use this information to understand whether people prefer salty potato chips or sugary chips. I don't know, I'm just making up something. And hence, the point is that as soon as I have changed the question, and in my ethics, in the consent that people had given me, I have a specific question. If I've changed that, I no longer have the right to use the data anymore. That is why we have to be careful at the start that we have now determined what all things we can do with the data. We can't simply start using the data because, well, yeah, it looks like, and I can dig into it and get some more information. You should have thought about that before.
Thanks, Dinesh. I think you've touched on some good points there towards the end as well. Those considerations, from the beginning, and what the purposes of data, what you're intending to do with it, and sometimes that is an unfortunate outcome at the end of a project. If you haven't sought certain permissions at the beginning, then you may find you're in a position where you have to go back and get additional permissions if you want to do something else with that data. I mean, these are the kind of things that we've mentioned, that you want to dive into early on and sort of get your head round at the start if you can, to save duplication of effort or having to go back and redo something.
Yes, Ginny says that yes, you can't go back to McDonald's and sell the data. Exactly right. I mean, we can use it only for the purpose that I took the permission for, and hence planning ahead of time is extremely important. And again, all this data has got a lot of commercial benefit. You could sell it to lots of people and gain money or other benefits. However, we have to do that planning ahead of time. We cannot think about it retrospectively.
Yes, perfect. Yeah, thank you. And look, I mean, I think we've about hit the hour now. But yeah, we realize we covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time, and yeah, it was really valuable to hear from two researchers that are actually using research data to publish their data as well, which is something that we really want you all to think about as research data librarians, to encourage you to think about either building in sharing at the start of your research data management, or if you're at the end of a project and you didn't consider it at the beginning, come and talk to us and we might be able to help. As we've helped these two researchers, to publish your research. So look, we're going to make this recording available and the slides as well, which have a lot of links in them, and certainly in the comments here, we'll put up a link where you can contact individual research support services through RMIT Library, and have one-on-one consultations with a librarian who can go into deeper detail on any of these subjects as you wish. So thanks very much, everyone. A very big warm thank you to Andrew and Dinesh for presenting as well. Very interesting, and thanks to Adam. And yeah, look forward to doing more of these with you. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you for having us.